So we're all here today to discuss the hiring trends and recruitment strategies for 2024. So this is, I suppose, a very important topic, and we have had a lot of interest in the webinar. So I think that, I suppose, does highlight the importance of the topic that we're here today to discuss. So joining us today is Christopher Pay, Director from Jobs.ie. We're delighted to have Christopher join us today. Also joining us is my colleague Paul Howard, Marketing Manager from Manpower, and myself then, Claire Lynch. I am Account Manager with Manpower. So I would work across manufacturing clients such as Medtronic, MSA and Valeo here in Galway. I will be hosting today's webinar, and we look forward to sharing some really interesting information with you over the next 45 minutes or so. Okay, so I'm just going to talk through the agenda for today's webinar. We're going to do a quick introduction to Manpower Group. Chris is then going to speak through the market update and key insights Jobs.ie are seeing in talent attraction, apologies. And then Paul is going to give some insight into the latest hiring trends and recruitment best practice tips from Manpower Group. We will then do a Q&A for about 10 to 15 minutes towards the end. So I suppose we do have some questions that we have already received ahead of this webinar. So thank you all, I suppose, for sending on the questions. And any brochures or reports that are going to be discussed in today's webinar, they will be available for download. As ever, the webinar will be available on demand through the same link that has been sent. So I think, I suppose, the key thing today and with all of the webinars that we do is to think about what this means for you. We all work in different industries, different roles, and across different organizations. But the key thing is if people can take away one or two points that is relevant to them in their role and in their industry, I think that's what we always try to achieve through these webinars, including today's. Okay, so just quickly then to introduce the Manpower Group Ireland as an organisation. So Manpower Group Ireland is the parent brand. Under that brand is Manpower Experis and Talent Solutions. So we are one of the world's leading workforce solution providers. We do deliver a range of services within workforce solutions across permanent and contract recruitment across all industry types. My role would sit then within the temporary solutions that we provide to clients. So I'm delighted now to hand you across to Chris Pay, who is Director of Jobs.ie.
Thanks, Claire. Firstly, thank you to Claire and Paul for inviting me on today to share some trends. So I'm here with my Jobs.ie hat on. I do work for the Stepstone Group, so that includes irishjobs.ie and nijobs.com. The Stepstone Group is a global business, so we're in Germany, North America, and headquartered in Germany. So we're very lucky in Jobs.ie that we get local market knowledge, local management team here, but we benefit from global technology and leveraging on that. So that's a quick intro, and we can maybe move to the next slide, and I'll tell you some things that you already know. Firstly, being it's a really tough market. We are seeing unprecedented candidate shortages, a cost of living crisis, which is putting pressure on employers to increase salaries. While every economist in the country is telling us not to increase salaries in line with inflation. So we're feeling that, and all of that is leading to a little bit of a longer time to hire. The box on the right here is really interesting, and it shows that for every job posted in 2009, so in the middle of the financial crisis, there were 60 applicants available for every job. By the time we got to pre-pandemic of 2019, that had reduced to 6. So as our unemployment rate was falling, we were seeing a huge decrease in the available talent. Post-pandemic into 2022, this has actually fallen again, and we are now down to 3 available candidates for every job posted. So I suppose in short, that does mean that the challenges we're experiencing are unlikely to change in the near future. And we can move on to the next slide then. So The black line here is the number of people who are unemployed. What we can't see that well, but it's okay because I'll explain it, is this is from 2008 all the way to the end of 2022. So you can clearly see a sharp rise in the number of people unemployed. The black line on the left is a sharp rise in the number of people unemployed, resulting in when we hit the financial crisis, end of 2008, start of 2009, and that really didn't change until about 2012. And from 2012 up until 2020, over an 8-year period, we had a relatively steep decline in the number of people unemployed. Obviously, in 2020, that shot back up a little bit, but very, very quickly normalized and came back down. And in the end, we've actually got our lowest unemployment rate since records began, 3.8% in May of this year. So clearly, there are less candidates available in the market. The other line beneath that is actually the number of vacancies, but we've honed in on that on the right-hand side. So the number of vacancies available, while unemployment rates have been declining, have clearly been increasing all the way from the start of the financial crisis all the way through. You can see there was a dip in 2020 for COVID, but an interesting thing happened at the end of COVID or midway through COVID when we started coming out of lockdowns. There is a massive spike in the number of vacancies available. And that's not that there were a huge number of positions created due to a pandemic. It was actually we lost a lot of workers in our workforce. We had people returning home who work in hospitality, for example. We've 1 in 10 people working in hospitality in Ireland, yet a lot of those were coming from overseas and went back to where they came from and didn't return. And that continued all the way up until really 2022. And for the first time, we started seeing that the number of job vacancies has begun to decline again. And we can move on to the next slide, please, Paul. So where are we now? So Irish Jobs.ie, our sister company Jobs.ie, but it's a collection of all our data, produces a jobs index every quarter. And what we are seeing is the job market is still quite strong against an economic slowdown, but there are some things in here that we haven't seen in recent times. So as this is a jobs index, the index number is 100. And if you look at the box on the left, you can see that Q1 2019 is 100. That's our index. And really, it doesn't really matter what happened to that blue line in the intervening period. The interesting point about this slide is when you go all the way over to the right-hand side, that blue line again, the index number again is actually 97. So we're actually seeing maybe a stabilization of the jobs market where we're returning to 2019 levels in terms of jobs posted. But it's actually a little bit too early to tell. What will be really interesting is our Q1 2024 index to see if that continues to decline, because if it's continuing to decline, it suggests a far greater problem in terms of actually we're reducing the number of jobs available in the market. And on the right-hand side, again, the index number being 100, which is the black dotted line going across, it just shows where some of the demand is. So in health, we are struggling clearly to fill roles in health, and you can see that is the black line that is declining now because of a health a freeze within the HSE really. But you are seeing that is still way above the index line. And the other thing that's really interesting is customer service has gone from being below the index line to above it. And really the feedback we're getting on that is that people are realizing during a downturn, delighting your customers is more important than ever. And if you are attracting a customer during a downturn, you damn sure better make sure you retain them. And the only way to do that is by having a really, really strong customer service function. So that's something that's new that we're seeing in this jobs index. And we can move to the next slide again. So what's the key data all in all? So year on year, we're down 28%, which is normalized back to 2019 levels, quarter on quarter, 7%. But we are seeing that there are still some areas where there are jobs increasing. And like I said, customer service being one of them. We can see that in the industries with the largest quarter on quarter increase. And then, of course, most in-demand roles and trending jobs, you still see customer assistant in both of those. And of course, then we are seeing staff nurse and clinical nurse manager are in there as well. So they are really the in-demand roles, but also the most difficult to fill right now. And we can move on again. So as I said, we're part of the Stepstone Group, and Stepstone Group, mainly we have job boards like Irish Jobs and Jobs.ie, but we also have an employer branding business based out of Sweden called Universal. And every year they do a survey in Ireland. It's 7,000 professionals, and they come back with what job seeker preferences are, the most desirable employers to work for, and things like that. So what I'm going to focus on here today is the job seeker preferences. So number one at the moment is a competitive base salary. Number two is work-life balance. I think neither of those are a big shock. People want a good salary in a cost of living crisis, but hybrid working still means they don't want to give up that work-life balance, those flexible working conditions. Having said that, point 3 and point 4 have actually flipped. So last year we saw flexible working above secure employment. I think that is indicative of the fact that the market is tougher, and that right now people are putting secure employment over anything else. And unfortunately, that creates another problem, because we're talking about the low unemployment rates. But actually, if you're in secure employment right now, this is telling us I'm less likely to look for another job because I don't want to take that risk. I'm risk averse. So we are seeing that in the conditions as well at the moment. And we can move on to the next slide. So this, I'll only take a second on this slide. I think there's two things that jump off. These are, by these industries, competitive base salary is number one across the board. But really what's interesting is the people and culture, as we break it down, are all your blue boxes, and they are all starting to come into number twos, number threes, and clearly the workforce has changed over the past number of years. Gen Z are very, very much focused on work-life balance, respect, culture, how you treat people, what are you doing to improve society. And I think that's not a bad thing, but at the same time, base salary is still the most important across all these industries. So we can continue to move on. And I think this is my second last slide, and I think it's really one of the more important ones for me. And I'm going to start on the right-hand side, because if we look at what are men's preferences, competitive base salary is number one, secure employment is number three. And yeah, they have encouraging work-life balance as number two, but clearly very important to male workforce still is it's all about salary and secure employment. When we move across to what women are saying is really important to them, it shows us where that dichotomy continues to be. It's work-life balance and flexible working conditions, and competitive base salary and secure employment come after that. And I think really what this is showing us is the fact that historically women have taken on a greater degree of childcare arrangements, collecting and dropping to school, and they are having conversations with employers about work-life balance and flexible working conditions, and probably making it more difficult for them to have that competitive base salary conversation. And it obviously is something that has contributed to what we know is a massive problem, is the gender pay gap. So I think what I take from this slide is that really, really important that as employers and people who hire, we need to see past that as well. I think flexible working and hybrid working should certainly improve that. And I'd hope to see in the next year or two that actually that becomes more of a balance between men and women, because most of us have the ability now, if we are working from home, to share that. So I think it's really important. But just something that jumped out to me is that hasn't really shifted, but needs to shift. And then that's really it from me, except for just a few recruitment tips from Jobs.ie. And going back to some of the stuff I've talked about, understanding your target audience and what they want. So we can clearly see competitive base salary. What are your hybrid working models? Are you flexible? Is it still strictly 8:30 or 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock, or can people do 10 to 7 and work around their own schedule a little bit better? So that's really, really important now. If you include salary, you will get 70% more applications. It's just, that is a fact that we have. It is huge. A lot of employers are hesitant to do it, but there is laws coming in around it anyway. So it's going to happen in the next year. only include essential requirements and qualifications. And I think one for me is education in particular. Like, you would often see a role advertised requiring a master's degree, and really the master's degree has absolutely nothing to do with it. You see it sometimes in sales roles, for example, and I don't think anyone in the sales environment necessarily needs master's degrees. And we should be looking more towards their soft skills, their EQ, outside of what they've done 10 years ago in an education setting. We have a gender bias decoder available. It's on Jobs.ie, it's on Irish Jobs. You can put any job spec into it and it will come back with more neutral language that doesn't bias women or men against how they will apply for a job. Much more clever than me, and it's very, very smart tool developed out of our business in Germany. But we know a number of businesses are already using it to make sure that their job advertisements are more inclusive. Standardized job titles are really important. So I think I'm a good example. Revenue director is not really a standardized job title. It would probably be more either head of operations or sales director, depending on the environment. So if we were to go out to replace me, I would be suggesting that we don't use revenue director as a title, because we'll probably get finance people applying and it's not a finance role. And the last thing is create a seamless application process. And sometimes what I encourage people to do is actually go through your own process. We have a huge number of clients who use an applicant tracking system, which means they leave our site to complete the process. The job seeker leaves our site to complete the applicant process, and sometimes are met with 30 or 40 questions. There could be open-ended questions. It can be very much almost interview style. And the reality is there is a huge drop-off rate from candidate to endpoint when you are using a really, really long application process. Go through it yourself, see how frustrated you get. And if you're getting frustrated, then go back and change it. And sometimes even we see things like they'll ask questions that are only related to people who work in the States, and that can be very frustrating as well. So just a few extra little tips, and I'm available for any questions either during this or after. And I'll hand back to you, Claire.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. I suppose what I find really interesting there, but not surprising, is the competitive base salary is what people are looking for, especially, I suppose, with the current cost of living. It's very important for all job seekers at the moment.
Sure.
I can rest assured. So I suppose we'll hand you now back to my colleague Paul, marketing manager with Manpower.
Great, thanks, Claire. Chris, great to see you on the call again. Obviously, we work very closely with Jobs.ie here at ManpowerGroup, so we have a great relationship with the team over there. Lots of great data points. Always give great advice, and the tips from Chris are great, particularly around the salary range. Like Chris has said, that's trending and coming into law pretty soon, next year, the year before. And job title is a big thing we talk about here in talent attraction as well. So couldn't agree more with Chris's viewpoints. So just going to talk through some of our data points following on from Chris's market insights and his side of the HR sector. So looking at some trends we do from some of our employment outlook reports and some recruitment strategies that you might want to think about as a business to have a look at for next year. So a mixture of some data points here and some strategies and process to think about as well. So starting off, we at ManpowerGroup, we do a quarterly employment outlook survey. We survey hiring managers all across the country, asking what their plans are for the upcoming quarter. Released it about a month ago now, and these are our latest results for Q4. So the time frame up till the end of the year. So fairly positive. It's trended upwards over the last couple of cycles. And you can see on the slide, 43% of companies looking to hire for this quarter, which is very positive. Confidence has started to return to the market in that hiring space. Only 12%, planning to decrease, with a net employment outlook of 33%. That's seasonally adjusted, so that's why there's a variance there between the increase and decrease figure. So 33% historically is good. It shows good confidence in the market. So backs up what we're seeing there with our own clients. A bit of confidence returning. And people are starting to look forward to next year and starting making plans towards next year. In terms of where Ireland sits, we do this survey across all of our 42 Manpower Group regions. So you can see Ireland trending there slightly above average. The global average there is 30%. Employment outlook, we're 33%, so slightly above some of our colleagues around the world. UK lagging a little bit there, just below below average. Costa Rica and Brazil, some of those countries doing very well, 41, 38, which is very high. So we're about average in terms of the market comparison here in Ireland. We look at some of the sectors to see what's happening individually across sectors. In this cycle, it was the communication services sector that came out on top. 42% employment outlook for that sector. A couple other notable ones, the finance and real estate, very buoyant as well. A lot of hiring there in finance and real estate. Healthcare, life science doing well as well. We see that with some of our life science clients. And then a few other sectors that you may work in yourselves there. We figures for a few areas as well. Notable in the IT side, a big bounce back in IT that had really slumped a lot in previous cycles. You would have seen a lot of headline news around restructuring and redundancies in that space. So good to see the IT stabilizing. Still slightly lower than some of the other sectors, but nonetheless, good to see some confidence returning there, maybe indicating that the overhiring that happened last year maybe over, with companies start to plan for growth again. We look at by company size, so nothing hugely of note here for this cycle. Normally, there's a good bit of variance between large companies and small and micro, but this cycle, interesting enough, was pretty similar confidence-wise amongst companies regarding hiring size, ranging there from 31 to 35. So no particular trend across companies for the cycle. It's fairly reasonably confident across all kind of company sizes, which is interesting in itself. We also look regionally. We have 5 regions we analyze here in Ireland as part of our employment outlook. This cycle, Munster was the most confident at 35, closely followed by Leinster. So it was the larger metropolis areas, I guess, that were trending this time. The Border County region have been doing very well over inside Q1 and Q2. That was the highest trending area, that Monaghan and Cavan border counties. Connacht did well, I think, in the thirds in Q3. But like I said, in this cycle, it's the main employment centres that have kind of taken centre, Dublin, Munster. So that's what we're seeing in terms of regionally across the country in terms of where the hiring is taking place. And just to reiterate, we do a yearly talent shortage report that we kind of update mid-year as well. So, as per Chris's slide, a number of applicants there, that's kind of reflection of the talent shortage. So 4 and 5 companies at the moment struggling to get the staff they need for their business. Sourcing and retaining talent continues to be a key issue in the market. So that talent shortage hasn't alleviated, and we're seeing it's still very high. Companies are still finding it difficult to attract key talent that they need for their business. So 81% is the highest on record, slightly above what it was last year. So certainly that demand and competition for key talent is certainly still evident in the market. So going to move on from some of the stats now just to rethinking our strategies in the current market. So having set the scene with Chris's, the great data and some of our own reports, we kind of have an idea of what's happening in the market. So what does that mean for us as employers? What does that mean for us as companies? Do we need to rethink what we're doing? What strategies are best, implemented in the current market? So looking at a few ideas here just to run through. So the first one we found was this idea of adapting agile hiring strategies in the talent crunch. So accepting that talent shortage is still there, how do we alleviate that? So I think companies have to be a bit more creative, a bit more innovative, and a bit more open in terms of how we hire talent to alleviate that talent shortage and get the talent we need into our business. So interesting enough, in this cycle, we found that the variance between perm and temporary workers has narrowed. So for Q4, 45% of companies are looking over the next 12 months, rather, 45% of companies are planning to increase their perm workers, 43% are temporary. Unusual in itself, in that most companies tend to look at perm as being the only solution, for certain roles, and temporary as being the only solution for certain industries as well. So that's kind of changed now with companies looking at both as part of their workflow planning, I guess. So people are looking at both permanent and temporary workers in conjunction with regarding to bringing people into their business, which is interesting. So it's about, not everyone is looking for permanent positions, no more so than everyone's looking for temporary positions. So it's about being as broad as possible in the talent market to maintain that broad talent pool, to pick the best staff from. So that's going to be a mixture of permanent workers and temporary. Gig workers probably less of a trend here in Ireland as it is maybe in UK or US, but certainly the temporary workers and perm is something to really take note of and think about for your own hiring going into next year. Also, employers are looking at non-traditional candidates to mitigate the talent scarcity. So thinking outside the box, being a bit more innovative in terms of maybe a skills-based hiring approach as opposed to an experience or educational-based approach, which would have been the traditional model up to 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So the number one non-traditional area here was that older target audience, that older candidates, those career changers, maybe moving from one industry to another. And that idea of upskilling. So candidates that don't meet your critical skills, they're 29%. So people that would be capable of doing the job, but may need a little bit of upskilling or training or assistance to get to that level that you need them to be. So not cutting those candidates from the process because they don't match all of your skills requirements, thinking about how we can bring them up to the levels needed. Are they capable of doing the job? Yes. If they are, let's equip them, with the skills they need to do that job. So there are a couple of the key ones we found in this non-traditional kind of talent pool. Plenty of examples of companies that are thinking outside the box in terms of their hiring approaches and bringing in people from non-traditional backgrounds, non-traditional talent pools. So again, important in the current market to think outside the box in order to bring in new talent pools. If everyone's targeting the same preferential pool, have to think differently to think how we can get people in. So we're going to talk a little bit of going beyond the CVs. So looking a little bit beyond the technical qualifications candidates would have, and what other skills they can bring, and how employers are, engaging with the different age categories as well in terms of candidates. So talking a little bit about beyond just the CV and the technical aspects of candidates' roles. So this slide kind of backs up one that Chris had earlier on, where we looked at what Irish employers identify as top productivity drivers. Work-life balance. It came out in Jobs.ie's report as well. 50% regarded as top productivity driver. Positive work culture, 43%. And clear goals and objectives, 38%. Professional development, they're slightly behind that. So they're the four main areas that we identified as being drivers of productivity. Work-life balance really is a critical thing, along with positive culture. In the current talent shortage and competition for staff, very little chance candidates are going to choose you as an employer of choice if they don't think it's going to be a positive place to work. That toxic workplace culture, people just don't accept that anymore. They'll bounce, go to another role, or not accept an offer in the first place. So think about those key aspects of being part of your talent attraction plan. Make sure you have emphasized that work-life balance that you offer and that positive work culture in the business. This was an interesting one we found in terms of what employers are HR priorities by generation. So we looked at the candidate pool by, you might have recognized some of those terms, the Gen Zs, Millennials, Gen Xs, Baby Boomers. So we looked at what the employers are prioritizing for each segment of the candidate pool. Interesting, on the Gen Zs, though, use those younger candidates, 38% are prioritizing recruiting. That talent pool as the number one priority for that age group. Millennials the same, getting them into the company. Talent attraction is the number one priority. And then as you move down to some of the more established workers, like those Gen Xs, the main priority there is upskilling that talent pool, upskilling and reskilling. So accepting they have very good skills in the market, but need to be adapted or tweaked as things change, particularly with technology. And then you get down to those very mature candidates, very experienced people in the industry, 30, 40 years, retention. Keeping those people in the business is the critical aspect. So it's interesting to see the different thought processes and the different priorities by talent pool type. Important for your company to think about that as well. And in terms of how you can attract the talent you need to attract and keep the ones that you need for those mature candidates as well. And we have a couple of slides and a little bit more detail on that in a second. Top soft skills, moving away from the technical skills. So the number one area here, collaboration, teamwork, accountability, and reliability, number two. So that ability to work as part of a team, whether that's on site, remote, being able to engage with colleagues, number one. We've seen that trend, either one or two in most of our reports. So no surprise to see that ability there as a soft skill, getting away from those technical skill aspects of what employers are looking for. talking about those younger candidates again, those Gen Zs. So this is what employers are looking for from that age category. So these are the top three. So active learning and curiosity, collaboration, teamwork again, creativity and originality. So not stunting their positivity, their growth ambitions, yet still putting emphasis on the aspects that the company needs: collaboration, that teamwork, and the ability to learn, the ability to grow. So they're the top three for the Gen Zs. Again, that Gen Zs being that younger age group, 18 to 26. And then the mature candidates, very experienced people, teacher and mentoring. And so, companies are looking for those traits from that candidate pool. The ability to mentor the younger staff, help with teaching, pass on the knowledge that they have to the younger elements of the company. So that's what people are looking for. So important to think about that if you're bringing in that target, those candidates. That's what you should be looking for from those, from those new attractions. People already in the business, maybe you're transitioning towards more of a doing approach to a teaching approach. In terms of keeping those business or keeping those baby boomers, in the company itself, and what their roles should be in the business. And then to finish up with a few slides, looking at this idea of talent attraction, staying ahead of the curve, I guess, staying ahead of competition, don't get left behind when it comes to attracting the best talent out there. A few things to think about, just to leave you with. First one is the reasons why job seekers are declining job offers. So fairly sickening to get, to find your ideal candidate, go through the whole interview process, engaging with them for a period of time, and then find they don't take up the job when offered. So these are the main reasons why that's happening. Compensation and benefits not meeting expectations, number one. So either the salary wasn't disclosed until late on in the process, or it just wasn't what the candidate was expecting, or there's some miscommunication around what that would be, number one. So that's the number one reason, along with the negative experience from people in the interview process. So that could be didn't have good rapport, maybe the communication skills wasn't what it should be, maybe the tone wasn't right, whatever it may be. There's various reasons why the candidate experience wouldn't be, up to scratch from the candidate's perspective. And roles and responsibilities was the third one. So to alleviate those, important to be clear throughout the process, in terms of the hiring process and the interviewing process. Be clear on what the salary is, be clear on what the role entails, be clear on culture, what the company is about, so make that, very obvious, both in conversations, job advertisements, and your career portal as well. People should get a really good, emphasis of what all those aspects are reflected from your business, to stop these, declining offers, at end stage. Factors impacting candidates' decision to join a company. So atmosphere of the workplace is number one. So being a fun, welcoming place, obviously fairly obvious one, you would think. Everyone wants to work in a positive work environment. Responsiveness throughout the hiring process. Again, that comes across in some of the surveys that we do on the candidate engagement side. So people really do, emphasize that the importance of communication through the hiring process, continuing calls, continuing emails, what's happening, time frames, where they are in the process, critical to keeping that, candidate experience high. And more of a chance of them accepting your offer, if they have that really good impression of your hiring experience and of your employees or of your hiring managers through that experience. And maybe some improvements to think about in the hiring process. More transparency, being upfront on as much as you can on these areas of compensation, benefits, clear, more accurate information, improved communication. So again, similar to the reasons that we saw people declining jobs, these are the areas you really should have a good focus on in terms of being the best you can be, and creating the best candidate experience, for those talent as they come through or as they engage with your business. I'm going to finish with this one. For anyone that's attended our webinars before, we talk about this quite a lot through our talent attraction department. So writing clear and concise job advertisements. I think that's really important from the start of the process. Once you have accepted that the communication, all the other aspects of what you need to do follows this. So I'm not going to read through them all, but I think the number one think about is the job spec in terms of what you want the role to be, and how you engage with candidates based on that spec is always different. A job advertisement is never the same as a job spec. You really have to tailor that job advertisement from the candidate perspective. You have to put yourself in their shoes. You have to write it as if you were the candidate. I think it's critical that you bring that into the advertisements. So talk about things like your company's EVP, make the language nice and clear, concise. friendly, easy to read, not just a list of tasks, that you're expecting them to do. That's not going to be engaging. If you have 30, 40 tasks that you want people to do, you have to write it in a way that's going to engage with the candidates, and make them want to apply. That's the goal of a job advertising, make them want to engage. And as per Chris's point on his slides, include a salary range. You just get such a better quality of applications when you include that salary range. If you don't want to include the exact salary point to give yourself a leeway, that's fine, but put it within 10%, 50 to 60, 50 to 55, 40 to 45, whatever the case may be. Put something in there to get those quality applications, in from the start. So some tips to think about for next year. So I'll leave it there and then pass it back to Claire.
That's great. Thanks, Paul. Some more really, really interesting content. I suppose from that content in particular, what I took from it is, again, top reasons why job seekers are declining an offer is the salary. So I think that's very much going hand in hand with, Chris, what you mentioned earlier, that's a really, really important attribute what job seekers are currently seeking. So some other key webinar takeaways from today's webinar, it is getting harder and harder to attract quality candidates. So I think we're all very familiar with that and the struggles and challenges we have as a business to attract quality candidates. So going back then, I suppose, Paul, to your point, it can be important not to be laser focused on having the ideal candidate and maybe thinking a little bit outside the box. Another key takeaway from today's webinar would be, I suppose, to be open to making improvements in your hiring process. So this is something actually we would have done in Manpower. And from my own experience, I find it's very beneficial. Like I think you mentioned earlier, Chris, to look at it from a candidate's perspective and really put yourself in their shoes to see if there is frustrations along the way on the applications. It gives a good insight into how we can improve those processes. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we did get some questions in advance of the webinar. So thank you all for sending in the questions and engaging with us. So the first question that we received is sent in by Noon. So the question is, have Ireland-based employers expanded their talent pool by tapping into international talents? And if they relocate talents from abroad, how do they attract talents to work in Ireland? So I might hand that across, Chris, to you first, and then Paul, if you have anything further that you wish to add in, we can go back to you.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah. I think the answer is definitely yes. I don't think there's been too much of a choice. We as employers need to tap into talent pool outside of Ireland, given what we've spoken about today. How do we help employers do it is probably where I'll come from it. So both Jobs.ie and Irish Jobs are members of the network, and the network is 134 job boards based across over 100 countries. And the benefit of it is we have one local contact here who does the work for you, gets you your quotes, gives you your pricing, you get invoiced from Ireland. So that's something that we do to help. And so you're advertising in that country for people to come to Ireland. The other thing that we have is a global talent mobility survey, which shows exactly where job seekers are willing to relocate to. So that's done once a year, and is again available on all our websites. And it will show us, if you want someone to work as a chef, where are they willing to relocate from within Europe or outside of Europe? If they need visas, it's all there. So that's how we're helping businesses do it anyway. And we can see by the number of customers who are purchasing a network contract that it has been increasing quite rapidly over the past 4 or 5 years. I think it's gone up actually by 500%. So it's pretty insane growth levels. So clearly businesses are having to tap outside of Ireland.
Okay, thank you for that, Chris. Paul, do you have anything else you would like to further expand on?
Sure, yeah, similar to Chris, I think it's definitely happening. I think we see it as part in our retain department. We have like an executive search kind of department here at ManpowerGroup. For those hard to find roles, we see that particularly a trend. So like for engineers or people that work in niche sectors, Very hard. It's a very small talent pool in Ireland for those kind of roles. Sometimes it can only be 50 or 100 people in the whole country that have those skill sets. So particularly for those hard to find talents, I think certainly that international pool, is worth looking at. Manpower Group are a global business, so like in those situations, we can engage with our colleagues throughout Europe, as an example, to expand a talent pool, whether it be UK or some of our continental colleagues. To bring people from other regions as well. So we do have that ability and that coordination to do that. One of the key things I think when you do bring staff or are looking at bringing staff internationally into the country to think about is housing. That's referenced in news all the time. You hear it on every talk show at night. It's one thing to find them and source them and to bring them into the country, but where are they going to live? We've seen examples of companies having to get into the rental market themselves with corporate lets. One example that was in the news was the NCT, brought candidates in from the Philippines, and they had to, create corporate lets in all of the towns that they operated those NCT centres in to actually house the staff, which is very, very proactive, very, very positive, and very, I suppose necessary thing to do. So you want to think about that as well. Thinking about that housing and setting up infrastructure, I guess, for them if you're going to bring them in from abroad.
Okay. Thank you both. So the next question then is sent in by Mudit. So are you observing a hike in Q4 2023 hiring and recruitment trends? If yes, what regions, roles and specializations are fueling the job market in Q4 2023? Paul, I think I'll hand that question across to you first. And again, then, Chris, if you have anything that you'd like to add on, feel free to do so.
Sure, yeah. I think we touched on a few of our slides on the hiring report and the Q4 hiring report. So yeah, we're seeing a positive growth from last quarter. It was trending downwards in Q1 and Q2, but certainly it's bounced back a bit in Q3 and 4 currently where we are. So there is more confidence there. There's a little bit of I suppose maybe certainty that perhaps the interest rates hikes are starting to level off now. Talk that their inflation might be just getting under control at this point. So the cost of doing business, has peaked, or at least they can see it in the future that they may go down at the next year, reduce the cost of business and create that confidence level for hiring. So we do see that positively trending in terms of regions. Like I said on my slide there, Dublin and Munster are pretty positive. So those larger talent pool populations seem to be fairly buoyant, seem to be doing well at the moment. In terms of roles, it's still difficult to find certain type of roles, as Chris would have indicated in some of his slides. So it's very much a sector by sector based approach there in terms of how difficult or easy it is to find candidates. Again, I would say just think outside the box a little bit when you're doing your talent attraction. Don't get too fixated on the ideal candidate and passing up everybody else because you haven't found the perfect person. It could well be the case the perfect person doesn't exist in the current market. Those people are willing to move because they're paid well where they are. So just think proactively in terms of what you can do to upskill people rather than get too bogged down on what your ideal person is.
I think that's important, yes. Chris, would you like to expand anything on that or?
Yeah, not so much. I think a lot of it was covered in the slides. I think it's very much for Mooted and everyone else. It's very much watch this space because we are, although certainly seeing it remaining quite buoyant for the first time, we are seeing that maybe the number of roles being advertised, because that's declining just slightly. It'll be interesting to see, is that seasonality based going into Q4 and does it rebound in Q1? So I think all I'd say is a bit of watch this space at this stage.
Okay, very good. So the last question we're going to talk through in today's webinar is a question from Michelle. Michelle's question is, we are finding it very difficult finding candidates for our company, tradespeople and maintenance. We have tried some of the job boards and local newspapers, but it is without success. What else can we do to attract the people we need? Again, Paul, I'm going to hand that across to you first. And as you said then, Chris, if you have anything that you would like to expand further on, feel free to do so.
Thanks, Claire. So I get the difficult one, Chris, before you. So that's up to me to jump in first. Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, you've tried the obvious routes, it doesn't seem to have worked out for that company so far. I think you want to go back to basics in a way and think about how you're promoting your roles. So we talked about the importance maybe of the job advertisement. If you're putting in the paper, putting on boards, are you using the right language? Are you getting across the right message as to how your, a company is an employer of choice, somewhere that people really want to be working? If it is those tradespeople, they're in high demand, so you may have to think about, again, did you put a salary range on your initial ads? Did you make it clear what level that person is required at? If for those type of tradespeople, I'd imagine you're going to have to be competitive on salary. It's all well and good thinking you're a great company to work for, or traditionally have a great name in whatever sector you work in. But if your salary isn't competitive for people like tradespeople, whether it be electricians or people working construction, it's going to be very difficult to hire them anyway. So if it is a critical hire for your business, I think you really need to have a competitive salary, or even above average salary to draw people over. Because if that's not the case, you're not going to get those switchers. You're not going to get people moving from jobs they're currently into your company if it's going to be paid less or the same. So you really have to think about that in terms of, if it's a critical hire, you might even need to pay a little bit above market average to get that person. And if you do, make it clear that in your job advertisements that is the case. So like Chris said in his slides, put the salary in there. If it is a really good competitive salary, why would you leave it out? In a competitive talent pool, that's the first thing people are going to see. So there would be a couple of points, and maybe go back to the first point again. If you're struggling to get people locally, maybe think about expanding beyond your local area. You mentioned that you're advertising the local newspapers, so you might have been looking for someone, based locally. That was your ideal thinking. So maybe trying to expand that out. Can you expand that out to other parts of the country? They may have to relocate if that's the case. If they do have to relocate, again, going back to what we're talking about in Q1, think about a relocation package for them. If you're bringing them from the city down to a rural area, think about how you can get them set up. So there are just maybe a few practical things you might think about, just in terms of expanding what you've already tried.
That's really beneficial. I think especially with the relocation package, that could be something that would really drive success in finding the ideal candidates, or maybe not the ideal candidates, but those that can do the job, without being laser focused on what we think is the ideal candidate. Chris, do you have anything further you'd like to add there, or don't
Yeah,
feel?
I think the first thing I'd say to Michelle is, I'm hoping it's not one of our job boards that you use, but if it is, actually contact me directly, because I'd like to have that for you separately. The other thing, just to note, if we go back to the point I made at the end of 2020, going into 2021, at the end of lockdowns, we saw a huge spike in the number of jobs being posted. And again, I mentioned about losing those candidates who aren't from Ireland. And actually, all the way back to 2009, 2010, a lot of people were let go from apprenticeships and weren't able to finish them. And we are seeing the results of that now. That's why we had an influx of people come into the country who were skilled workers working on building sites. And if they've left, we kind of need to get them back. And I do think, going back to Paul's point, it's almost question one and question three are very intertwined. I think if we don't have the talent pool here, we need to look at it. And you can see it, they're talking quite a lot about education and trying to encourage people into these apprenticeships to make sure that we do have those skilled tradespeople that are becoming more and more in demand. But I think the main point is, you saw competitive base salaries, number one. The only way to actively encourage candidates in a market like this is to pay more than anyone else.
Okay. Okay, thank you both for going through all of those questions. So just to finish up then, we will be holding our final webinar of 2023 in December. So you're all very welcome to join us to attend that webinar. The reports we referenced today are available below, and we can email a PDF version of today's slides for anyone that wants a copy. The session will be available also on demand. So feel free to reach out to us should you need any assistance with your HR planning for the year ahead. We're more than happy to help. Also, I would like to thank Chris and Paul, our speakers today. Thank you both for attending the webinar. We have had some really interesting, insightful information, so I'm sure we'll all benefit from that. Thank you both.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.